Hey everyone, my name is Addison Williams. I am the community manager at CV Outreach, and this morning we have Ben Bennett from the Resolution Movement, an initiative of Josh McDowell Ministry with us this morning. Ben came to the office a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the interaction between CV Outreach and how that is implied in some of the things that Resolution Movement is doing as well. So Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Super excited to have you today. Tell us a little bit about the Resolution Movement and what that means to you.
Yeah, so the Resolution Movement, the name initially came from the idea of resolutioning, like resolution, because I think if we look at the state of what young people are dealing with today, what the church is dealing with, so many are dealing with mental health issues, addictions, hurt, and many, their spiritual life is having little impact on their emotional and relational well-being. So we really wanted to resolution people with biblical solutions backed by brain science, psychology, research, to help people find lasting solutions and freedom through Jesus and start to thrive again. So that's kind of what, in a nutshell, what the Resolution Movement is all about.
Awesome. Fantastic. So you mentioned hurt and just the feeling of uncertainty there. So talk a little bit more about the way that you came to know those things. Why are you specifically targeting those over some others?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we found in just years of ministering to people, traveling the world, is that so many are dealing with hurt, unmet needs, disconnection in their relationships. And all of those things happen growing up, but now in their relationships. And when we have those voids, when we experience things that we weren't supposed to experience in the Garden of Eden, but experience now as a result of the fall, that causes a deficit in our soul. And I believe that we're designed on purpose. Proverbs 4:23 says that above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do in life flows from it. So I just think, what happens when your heart's been broken? What happens when your heart hasn't been full and you're not experiencing the fulfillment that God created you to experience in the Garden of Eden, where you're satisfied and you're known and you have needs met by God and by others? Well, we have deficits. We have unmet longings. We have unmet desires. We have hurt and confusion and pain, and we have to do something with that.
Yeah.
And that can lead into various struggles. But being hurt, having unmet needs is something that, regardless of how good our life can be and how good our relationships can be, all of us will experience that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in the Resolution Movement, you mentioned the 7 longings. So can you elaborate on what the 7 longings are and specifically what that means to you?
Yeah. So one of the key foundational things we talk about in the Resolution Movement is that God created us with these 7 longings of the heart. And the way we arrived at those 7 longings was Josh McDowell and I spent years ministering to people and looking for common human experiences, studying the scriptures, and then meeting with therapists and brain scientists the past couple of years and saying, what are the common baseline longings and desires that all humans have? And we found that all throughout Scripture, there's these recurring ones, and that's how we came up with the 7 longings. And those 7 longings, when were designed to be perfectly fulfilled in the Garden of Eden. Some of them are things like the assurance of safety, affirmation of feelings, acceptance, attention. And when those are fulfilled, we thrive, we flourish. We have healthy relationships with God, with others, and with ourselves. We know our value and our worth, and we actually believe it. And so when those are experienced, this abundant life happens. But we know the chaos that we live in, the hard world we live in. we all have unmet longings. Those 7 longings go unmet in so many different ways, and that hurts, and that causes confusion, and then we start to believe lies, and we start to cope with those unmet longings.
Absolutely. That's a very serious, whenever you take the 7 longings, it's a very serious opportunity to reach people. So in the resolution movement, how do you break down the 7 longings, and how do you go then and introduce those hurts and those pains that people are going through within the ministry? How do you go out and reach that audience?
Yeah, I throughout our messaging and videos and podcasts and in-person speaking, one of the thesis statements we share is that unmet longings lead to unwanted behaviors, or unmet longings lead to any unhealthy patterns. So then we start to get into, we don't always talk about in depth the 7 longings, but I'll briefly explain, hey, we all want to be loved and accepted and safe, you know? Is there anybody who disagrees with that? And it's kind of like well, duh, yeah, I want that.
Yeah.
And I give examples of, when we have an unmet longing, when we feel rejection by somebody, when we don't get invited to something, when we feel criticized by a parent or a friend, that causes in the moment an unmet longing. And we do something with that. We start to get anxious, or maybe we turn inward and start feeling depressed or some kind of shame. Maybe we go to pornography to get some type of pseudo love and acceptance in the moment. But the big thing is helping people understand that their struggles, their issues aren't random, and neither is the healing that God wants to bring, the thriving life he wants to bring. And by starting to question, rather than just simply condemning our sin or condemning our struggles, if we start to question our struggles, we can start to find answers, because we're questioning, what is the unmet longing? What happened before I started to get anxious or went to this issue? So that thesis, that theme is throughout pretty much all of our content.
Yeah. So in talking about the questions that people ask each other or themselves whenever they start to get anxious, or what forced me to have road rage, for instance, in that moment, going back to the anxious mindset, are there any running themes that you've pulled out, like main questions that people ask each other or ask themselves? Would you say that there are like a top 5 question list that you've seen a running theme throughout in interacting and engaging with those individuals?
Yeah, one is having people just keep asking why. Why am I so anxious right now? And not just arriving at, well, it's just randomly happening, but what happened before this? Or what happened yesterday? Or why am I reacting in this way? But one of the big ones is, what's the unmet longing? Often I'll point people to either our 2 podcast episodes on the 7 longings, or talks I do on the 7 longings, and people start to get familiar with them. And then they can say, okay, I keep struggling with anxiety. Let me look at the 7 longings and say, what's going unmet in my life? Or what was significantly unmet in the past, and now when it goes unmet in a little bit of a way, it really triggers me. So asking what the unmet longing is. Another one is with anger and road rage, so to speak. One of the things I found is that 99% of the time that we deal with anger, it's about compensating for fear. Anger is a secondary emotion to cover up some fear. And most people, in the moment of their anger, they're fearing rejection. They're fearing that their longing for acceptance isn't going met, or didn't go met, or hasn't gone met. And that's anger is a way of pushing people away, to say, no, you can't reject me anymore. And their anger actually stops them from feeling rejected. So, but most people experience a variety of the 7 longings. But in our day and age, the 2 that we see a lot is lack of acceptance. So people not feeling accepted, so they feel rejected, whether that's being criticized by somebody, or not feeling heard, or feeling misunderstood, or the lack of safety. All you have to do is turn on the news or get on social media, or be driving on the highway and somebody cuts you off, and it's like there's so much lack of safety in our world that in a moment can cause a longing to go unmet.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot there. So whenever you talk about safety, that could be, a broken home life, or even if somebody's living alone, they're out of that high school age and they're on their own. That lack of safety is then not there anymore, right? Their safety net. So somebody that is listening to the Resolution Movement or listening to one of your podcasts, how would you encourage them to find that safety? The question of why, of course, but kind of going into those 7 longings, what would be somebody's next step after asking why? What would you encourage them to do?
Yeah, to define what, with safety, we call it, as one of the longings, the assurance of safety. Mm-hmm. And we define that as being protected and provided for physically, emotionally, and financially. So there's a lot there.
Yeah.
But physically, if you think about the Garden of Eden, we had all of our needs met, like food, water, shelter. Mm-hmm. Emotionally, good connection with God and others. Financially, well, there's an abundance of everything, and that wasn't a concern. But now it's like when that comes up, or whether that was happening growing up or is happening now, when there's a question about where's my next paycheck going to come from, or am I going to get laid off? What we found is that relationships are key, and especially with the emotional aspect of safety. We may not always experience and can't always experience the perfect fulfillment of that longing, but we can look at our experiences with God, the character of God, things like Matthew 6, that looking at the heart of God, that He cares about the birds of the air, and how much more will He care for us. And one thing that's significant is remembering past experiences of where God provided. So, hey, I don't know what's going to happen with my job, but I realize He gave me this job to begin with. Yeah. And I can do my part, but I'm going to pray and ask Him and trust Him. But also, like I mentioned, relationships. Like if we are building healthy relationships in a network and involved in a church where we do have a support system, those people can come alongside of us and help fulfill that longing for the assurance of safety.
Absolutely. So you've talked a lot about the Resolution Movement. I'd love to backtrack for just a minute, because you've said that you spent years with Josh researching in the science and really coming to the 7 longings ultimately. So talk a little bit more about your faith journey and how you came about the Resolution Movement.
Yeah. Well, I met Jesus at a young age. And would say I was graced with that, and really met Him somewhere between the ages of 4 and 7. I really understood the gospel, and that God loved me and He was present, and it was almost like He was a friend, and I had that awareness growing up, and I understood that I had done wrong things, that I messed up, and that separated me from God, but that God provided the solution through Jesus, and Him being God, living the life of obedience to God that I couldn't live, dying and rising again for me. So I understood that that I could be reconciled with God at a young age, even in my young mind, and I had a very real friendship with God at an early age, and I know I had the Holy Spirit and was saved at a young age, because I remember just talking to so many of my friends on the street, playing, and I was talking to them about explaining the gospel and seeing them give their lives to Christ and whatnot, ages 7, 8, 9. So had that foundation early on, but never really understood much of how to grow, how to learn more about God. Sure, I knew there was the Bible, but didn't really understand how to build the relationship besides just talking to Him. So I did a lot of talking with Him, throughout the early years of my life. But it wasn't really until I went away to college at George Mason University and got involved in a campus ministry that I really started to grow spiritually. I understood how to study the Bible. I started studying doctrine and figuring out all of these things, like my opinion on the age of the earth and when I thought Jesus was coming back and Revelation and eschatology and all of that. But started to be involved in a community that was really spurring me on and encouraging me and helping me grow spiritually. Yet, at the same time, there were so many unresolved issues in my life. My emotional and relational life was separate from my spiritual life. It was like I was growing with God, or trying to, and growing in intellectual knowledge, yet there wasn't a ton. There was a little bit changing, but there wasn't a ton changing in my view of myself, my addiction to pornography, my struggles with anxiety and depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. It was like, here's this life of struggles over here, and I am talking to people about it, but my faith wasn't impacting that. Eventually, through years of therapy and studying the scriptures and walking through a process that was based on theology, psychology, and brain science, I started to really see these components of my life connect and realize that, wow, I was carrying a lot of hurt. I was dealing with a lot of unmet longings growing up, and I was coping with them and getting anxious about them, and that had just developed this lifestyle over here. Yet what I heard in the church and what I thought the scriptures taught was that, oh, that's just my fallen nature. That's just my sin nature. So of course it's going to be that way. And it's just like, just got to repent and believe and hope Jesus changes me one day. But I missed a lot of what I now see in the scriptures, that no, there's so many one another's all throughout the New Testament. And that's because we're designed to be, we're hurt experientially in relationships, and we have to be healed experientially in relationships. And we need one another for support and really to heal the hurts I had from growing up and rejection and whatnot. I needed new experiences of being loved by God through other people and of being accepted. And over time, it just started to blow my mind. And I started working with more and more people and missionaries and helping other people find freedom and healing, and realized, wow, there is such a disconnect globally in the church with our hurts and struggles and our spiritual life. And then also our emotional lives and our relational lives. We think that generally, I would say, I think many people think that spiritual maturity is seen by how much you know about the Bible, how much you do for God, when that's not what it's about. It's about how much do you believe who God says you are. You know, Christianity is so much less about doing and more about just being a son of God, a daughter of God, and out of an outflow of that, loving people. And unless we get to those unresolved areas of our life and the unmet longings and the hurts, just kind of like anger, we'll compartmentalize those areas, and we'll still be trying to push people away because we've dealt with so much rejection and hurt, and we won't let people close. And we need to be fully known and fully loved. I mean, only the parts of us that we allow to be fully known can be fully loved. So in my journey, realizing all of that, starting to find freedom and healing, seeing other people find freedom and healing, and then as a result, working with so many missionaries and churches, seeing people, their ministries become more effective, them want to share their faith more, them being more loving and caring towards other people, their witness for Christ increased. Eventually, I approached Josh McDowell about 3 years ago and said, can I work with you? Will you mentor me? Can I speak with you? Can we do something together to help serve the church and reach non-Christians and talk about these issues that are deep within us that I think a lot of people don't end up talking about, or at least finding solutions to.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your own experience, you had your personal struggles, which I have my own personal struggles, but overall, what would you say most young people are struggling with today in your feedback from doing videos on the 7 longings, or even in your research? What would you say is the biggest red flag that our young people are searching for and asking for today?
As far as, I think, well, there's a lot of things, but the biggest ones that I would say we've seen in research and just with talking with people is, and Pew Research shared this a couple years ago, that 70% of teens say anxiety and depression are major issues amongst their peers. We've also done various studies of how many men and women, young people, are struggling with pornography, and it's over half of both male and female young people. I mean, pornography is the new sex ed for so many people, and it's just normative, and there's no shame around it. And with the next generation, so those would be two. And I think behind a lot of those, I would say, is the disconnection, the hurt, the pain, the unmet longings, because this generation is growing up in a time where they're more connected than ever before, yet lonelier than ever. And I often say that loneliness isn't a lack of friends, it's a lack of meaningful connection from others. So what happens when you're born into a world where you don't feel this meaningful connection with your parents for whatever reason? Because maybe they're distracted, they're on social media, they're trying their best that they can, but they've got their own stuff. So if you don't have the 7 longings fulfilled, if you don't feel safe, if you don't feel emotionally attended to as a kid developing, if you don't learn who you are and how God sees you and that you're made in the image of God, that leads to those deficits and that hurt. And then the symptoms of that are the loneliness, the anxiety, the depression, the coping through porn or low self-image, or putting your identity in success or performance or friends. So the root issue is just really helping people from a young age know who God is, know who God says they are, and giving them experiences, not just telling them intellectually, but showing them and helping them live into that and believe that, yes, this is true, this is who I am. And I think that helps prevent a lot of these struggles. Yeah.
So whenever we talk about identity, I would say identity, well, the lack thereof, your true identity in Christ. So how would you encourage somebody to press into that outside of, watching a video, but just internally asking, who am I? How can I overtake this? Or at what point would you recommend somebody going to somebody else? How do you open that trust?
Trying to think through how to simplify it. I think one of the first steps is realizing that in the church, we tend to focus much more on our sinnerhood than our sainthood. Well-known therapist, Dr. Henry Cloud, I was having a conversation with him a couple of years ago, and he said the average sermon outline is, you're bad, God is good, try harder. And we really struggle with our theology around, wait, but aren't human beings totally depraved? And aren't they sinners? And aren't they, disconnected from God? We can be sinners and in this state, the passed down from the fall, original sin, without losing our value. I believe that a gospel that starts in Genesis 3 is not the gospel. We got to start with Genesis 1 and 2, where men and women were made in the image of God, above plants, animals, and all creation. And we really got to focus on, okay, what does it mean to be made in the image of God, Christian or not? and the value and the dignity and the worth, that people have, regardless of whether or not they're Christians. And if we start there and start to understand that, then it can put the rest into context. Wow, that was a tragedy that happened with the fall. Sin was passed down. There was disconnection that deeply grieved God, and now humans have gone on to hurt one another. It didn't make them any less valuable or worthless, but it caused a brokenness that was passed down and filled the earth. But, the beauty of the gospel is that we can be restored here and now to a similar state to Adam and Eve in the garden. Not exactly, because we still sin, but if we really look at it, the majority of the time that throughout the New Testament that Christians are addressed, it's as saints. It's not as sinners. I got a butterfly tattoo on my lower neck. I don't know what side it is on, but it came from the analogy of, why do we refer to ourselves as converted sinners if we're now saints? Just like we don't refer to a butterfly as a converted caterpillar. It's now a butterfly. And I think we're so afraid that we'll get so prideful if we stop talking about our old self or our sinnerhood or whatever. But we need to talk about who God has made us. We're adopted. We're in Christ. We're restored. We're loved. We're forgiven. We're His sons and daughters in His family. So I would start with thinking about the theology and is what you're listening to, is it backing that up, or is it furthering your shame and your sinnerhood, or is it helping you grow in your sainthood? And so I've had to stop listening to a lot of preachers and teachers that I still respect, but it wasn't helping me grow and seeing myself the way God sees me. And I think that is a large thing that we kind of deal with in the church. So that would be one. Number two is, once we know who God says we are and that we're made in God's image, kind of remembering that it's not like God just tolerates you as a result of Christ's work on the cross. For God so loved the world that He sent His Son. It's He loved you before, and He loves you now as a result of Christ's work on the cross, but He also likes you, He wants a relationship with you. He wants to restore you. It's one of the reasons why Adam and Eve were created in the garden, of course, to give God glory and to worship Him, but to have a relationship with Him. Not just to be like, oh, He's kind of distant, I'm not sure if He really likes me, but to have this intimate foundation and relationship with Him. And once you start kind of getting into those things, just identifying a verse and attaching that with an experience. For me, for years, just struggling with my view of God, thinking that He was angry when I messed up, that He turned His back on me, that He just kind of tolerates me. I memorized the verse, 1 John 3:1. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. And just quoting that is an intellectual thing, but what we've got to realize is we have so many emotional, painful experiences in this world of shame, of hurt, of feeling like people don't like us, like we're not good enough. So we also have to have experiences of truth. So to take that truth and then experience it in the here and now with God. And also to remember, and this was key for me, remembering back on this experience I had of where God felt so close, and it was like He was saying I was His loved son, and visualizing that, closing my eyes, taking some deep breaths, and doing that every day throughout the day for over 5 years now, what that has changed is some of my default view of myself and who God sees me to be. So, how do I summarize that? Wrestle with what you're listening to, with what is taught and what the Bible actually says about who you are and your value and identity, and then identify a verse and start experiencing it and visualizing it and remembering experiences with God that back that up.
Yeah. I go back, speaking about favorite Bible verses, one of my favorite Bible verses was Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord." And that verse is great, but it leaves a piece out of it because in verses 12 and 13 it says, "If you seek me with all of your heart, you will find me." And for so long, part of my journey was just taking that front side of knowing, yes, God has a plan for me, but I'm not taking action upon that. I'm not really moving into resting in his presence and his opportunity to make me a saint, if you will, of to know that he has a plan for me, but also to know that even though we're resting in him, we should be seeking out ways to draw into that relationship with him. Because for so long, I felt the disconnect there, right? I wasn't pushing into that relationship. And so for you in the resolution movement, you're helping people move into that relationship. You're giving them the words and the personal experiences that you might have gone through, and then also saying for the audience, whoever it may be that's listening, here's your opportunity to find your story, to find your relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And it really resonates with me to know that whenever we package the 7 longings, whatever they are, and whatever our own identity is in what we're trying to solve, if we just know that, yes, God has a plan for us, but also if we start to move in that relationship, things become a little bit easier. And if somebody says, "I don't like you," well, that's okay because God still loves me, type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Having a foundational relationship with God and being so sure, of who he says we are. But that can be hard for so many of us because of our experiences with authority figures, and that gets copied and pasted onto our view of God. But if we know intellectually, without a shadow of a doubt, who God says we are and who God is, based on the scriptures, and see it for what it is, then what we can do is work towards, okay, how do I get this intellectual truth to seek deep within my soul, to my heart, and become almost like an emotional truth, an operating system or view or way of viewing, the world around me on a everyday basis.
Absolutely. So we live in a very fast-paced society. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're saturated with information. Some of it is very wrong. Some of it is very relevant and good. For example, the resolution movement. So in the fast-paced society that we live in, how would you encourage somebody to simply slow down and start asking those difficult questions?
Yeah. I mean, one of our greatest challenges is we are so overstimulated by technology, and then we get addicted to the dopamine, and then if we don't constantly have it, then we feel restless and we go through withdrawals. And when your brain is that stimulated, it's like you can't slow down and you can't focus and whatnot. So I made a decision a couple years ago, which if you can do this, I would encourage you to do it, to keep your phone on Do Not Disturb 24/7. So my close friends know that they have to call me twice if they want to get through to me, but I still might not be near my phone. And then that allows me to, rather than being addicted to the dopamine and it always is going off in my pocket, and who texted me, who called me, all of that, to just have these rhythms of checking it when I want to or I need to, and not being a slave to my phone or addicted to my phone, but being able to do that when I want to. And then I turned all app notifications off, on my phone, because I don't want to constantly be getting a buzz whenever there's an email or a notification on TikTok or Instagram or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that's one way I've helped limit some of this stuff. But then there's other things that I've started to implement, regularly, or at least a couple times a year, going on vacation and making sure that when I'm not at work, I'm not at work. That I can truly be off and pausing the inbox and things like that, setting things up, whatnot. But one that I practiced recently, which was really helpful, was redirecting thoughts. Like if a thought related to something that I didn't need to deal with, whether it was with work or a problem that I would solve after my time off came up, I would practice, that's an interesting thought. Back to the present. And just, not condemning that thought and not trying to shove it out, but noticing it and then moving back to the present. I think that's part of what it means to take thoughts captive.
Yeah.
So those are a couple things that I've tried. And then being present with, this is a big one, like trying to regularly hang out with my friends or people I care about or my small group throughout the week. And when I'm with them, to not be on my phone. And again, to have my phone on Do Not Disturb.
Right.
Because how many times have you been hanging out with someone and they're like, I got to take this.
Yeah.
It's like right in that moment, the phone and the person on the phone somehow becomes more important than you. But to be present there and realize that other things can wait. And these are just a couple ways we can slow down and detach from, I'd say, the technology that's can cause us to be engaged in that fast-paced world, but we can actually slow down and detach from that a little bit.
Yeah. My favorite is when I walk into a restaurant and there's 4 people at the table and all 4 people are on their phones.
For sure. And it's even funnier to think about, what if they're texting each other?
Yes.
And they're not talking verbally, but they're doing that. They might be gossiping, texting about one another.
They could.
I've heard of that happening.
Or they could be talking about us walking by.
Exactly.
Look at that. Look at those guys.
Look at that guy. He's not even on his phone.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the great quotes talking about technology that I heard recently on one of your podcasts, it was actually one statement made by Josh. He said, "We are connecting but not relating." Mm-hmm. To elaborate, we are connecting with our thumbs but not with our tongues. So that was very powerful to me, because it's like I see that everywhere, and I have been that guy to pull my phone out, and consciously I can know that probably shouldn't have happened, right? Because I have somebody in front of me. So unpack that. How can we, aside from like the thoughts of coming back to the present or setting Do Not Disturb, unpack that for us. We're communicating with our thumbs, but not with our tongues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think during this time we're all kind of experiencing the effects of that, because I've heard so many people realize just what has been lost as we've been unable to some extent to gather with friends or people in person. There's something about being made in God's image, which is to be made with real needs and relational needs, and we're also made physical, and we need to be in the presence of other people. So when we're just texting or connecting through technology, there's such a disconnect, because we can't see people's facial expressions, read their body language. We're just reading what they're saying. We don't know their tone. Mm-hmm. And that really limits the ability to feel connected and understood, and like we're understanding other people. So that would be one of the things, is there being such a emphasis in the younger generation of, I could text somebody or I could call them. It doesn't really make a difference. Or I could FaceTime them, or I could meet up with them in person. But why not just text them? All of those lead to way different levels of feeling connected and understood and whatnot. And again, in person, you feel so much more understood and connected, just because of how God designed us and whatnot. So that would be one of the things. And then I think what Josh was getting at also in that point is, like I said earlier, loneliness is caused by this lack of meaningful connection, not just connection. And so many of us think to be connected is to just get together with somebody and to do something, play a sport or go get a meal and not really talk about anything meaningful.
Right.
But there's something that happens when we get into the nitty-gritty of our lives, and we fulfill the 7 longings in one another, and ask them things that help them feel understood and known, and ask their opinions on things, or ask how they're really doing, like what's going on inside of you, what are you feeling, what's been hard. When we connect in that way, something that's interesting is our brain releases oxytocin and dopamine, and that causes us to feel bonded and connected to somebody else. But if we're kind of blocked off and we're not really talking about anything important, and we're not really laughing, and it's just kind of like sending a text, we don't get that same feeling of meaningful connection. So by asking people questions about their life, what's going on, how they're doing, how they're feeling, what are they worried about, what's God doing in their life, and then just laughing together and asking about their opinions and thoughts about things, that causes a much greater sense of connection, and that I'm not alone in the world, and that somebody gets me. And that's what God wants to experience. God wants us to experience in relationships.
Right. Absolutely. It's easy to say, how's it going? I think that's our catch-all phrase in the States is, hey, what's up? How's it going? How's life? But we don't really mean it. So for somebody to actually say, hey, Ben, how are you feeling today? Even if it kind of takes you back, it's that opportunity to see somebody else actually caring. And the more times that we can do that, and we can encourage others to do that, I think that really brings value to the table whenever we talk about meaningful connections and building lasting relationships, especially for coworkers in the office, right? We see them every day. There's a balance of doing life together and working together, but obviously if we can encourage and foster that environment, the meaningful connections will naturally take place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So crucial.
Yeah. So whenever we talk about what we do at CV Outreach, which is taking people online into a face-to-face relationship with the pastor, a lot of our videos focus on felt needs, anger, anxiety, some of the main things, loneliness, loss of a loved one. So a lot of the things we do really correlate with how you're interacting with your audience as well. So for our pastors, for our church leaders that are responding to these people, for instance, I'm really having a bad spell of anger, or, I've lost a loved one. How would you encourage some of our partners to respond to these people and get a conversation started?
I think one is taking interest and being quick to listen and slow to speak. I think of how we're called to mourn with those who mourn and celebrate with those who celebrate. And so much can be done and learned by just being a good friend who asks questions and listens and shows care. Because so many people aren't experiencing that in the world. And more often than not, what people need when they're hurting, when they're struggling, is, rather than answers at first, is to be empathized with, to feel like somebody gets them and is there for them and is safe and trustworthy. Because there's nothing like having a relationship where you don't feel safe and somebody isn't trustworthy and they're going to share your stuff with the whole world, or just get there on Twitter and you'll never believe what this person said. So showing up and being that safe person who's not going to condemn them, who's not going to judge them, and this can be hard for us in ministry, is not going to try and fix them. I think so often we just want to say, well, you just need Jesus, and here's the gospel, and I know you're struggling, and here's the gospel, and we can get there, but I think we can learn a lot from Jesus, how he showed up, he cared, he wept. We do need to get to the gospel and talking about the problems and whatnot, but to have somebody's ear, we got to show them that we care.
Yeah. So speaking of showing that you care, building relationships, do you have any awesome stories that you've seen through your videos on social media that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I think of various ones, and we just launched 6 months ago now, so some of these stories have started to pick up a little bit more, and that's kind of one of the hard things. Like, rather than in person when you're speaking, you can get a lot more interaction. But some cool things have been happening. One is that a guy named Michael came across our ads on our video about anxiety and just shared that he was so anxious about what happens when he dies. Like, and had all these questions, like, will I see my family members again? Like, is there heaven? And how do I know? And it was the video about, we were talking about the felt need of anxiety and then pointing to what Jesus says about anxiety. And that began this discussion with him of helping him understand, no, there's evidence for the fact that there is an afterlife, and that Jesus was God, and that he wants to have a relationship with you, and you can spend eternity with him and other people who know Jesus that you love. And so that began a dialogue of going back and forth and asking how I can serve him. And one of the questions I asked is, he was like, I'm so anxious about this, and I just don't know if God exists. I was like, what do you think God would need to do to prove his existence to you? We just began a dialogue about that. Answering questions that people are asking, and just showing up and listening. Another one was a guy reached out to me, and I connected with him a little bit, and he cares a lot about streaming on Twitch and talking about mental health and helping people, and he knows Jesus. But he was like, hey man, my girlfriend died by suicide yesterday, and I just want to say thank you so much for what you're doing and offering hope. And we began a dialogue, because I didn't know at that point, did he know Jesus? Did she know Jesus? How's he doing? And he has an important role streaming on Twitch talking about mental health, and he's dealing with some of the stuff, and somebody he cared about is dealing with the stuff and just died by it. So just tried to encourage him and give him hope, and pointed him to the grief counselors and whatnot who could really walk through him with. But just that opportunity, just, man, my heart goes out to him, and but also wanting to encourage him. And this is why we do what we do, like to offer people hope and to prevent, to try and prevent things like this and reach people where they're at and give them eternal hope. Another girl I think of came across our stuff, and more so than just watching one video, she started watching all the different Instagram videos, and for years just thought that, man, I don't know why I'm struggling with unwanted sexual behavior. I don't know why I'm dealing with so much shame. But hearing my story, hearing Josh's story, she realized that she wasn't the only one. She wasn't the only one who had experienced sexual abuse. She wasn't the only girl who was, dealing with an addiction to pornography. And she realized that those issues weren't random, that there was a correlation between the hurt, the unmet longing she had, and how she had learned how to survive. So many of these unwanted behaviors, these unhealthy behaviors that people are dealing with, is about survival, about trying to make it through life. And Jesus wants to invite us into something better, to set us free from those things. So those are a couple examples of what God's been up to.
Yeah, that's very cool. So to recap, with the ability to build the face-to-face relationship, what are some practical ways that, for instance, you said anxiety and depression and pornography are some of the biggest things that teenagers are facing right now. So for the youth pastor or for the church leader, the small group leader that's actually interacting with these teenagers on a daily basis, what are some practical ways that you've seen effective in addressing some of those concerns, some of those issues?
Trusting that if you are a safe person and showing up and have a good relationship, those people and are showing acceptance and love and talking about Jesus with them, realizing that you don't have to have all the answers, but you want to be on the journey with them. And being that person who can help them in their journey and ask what they need and offer prayer and offer support. But then to slowly start, maybe you witness something in their home life, like their home life doesn't seem ideal, whether it's a disengaged parent or a family that's been split up, or a sibling or maybe they have a sibling that is kind of like a bully to them. Figure out what are the things they're experiencing that don't look like the Garden of Eden in their relationships, in the world, in their situation, and helping them see that those things are influencing. They can't help but influence the way they view themselves, their sin struggles, their mental health issues, because the unmet longings will lead to these unwanted behaviors, these unhealthy patterns, these struggles. And so starting to just ask about their home life. And one of the challenges is we have no other life to compare ours to and what we know is normal. So the more you can find out, what's your relationship like with your dad, or ask questions of, do you feel like you connect well with one of your siblings or with your dad or whatnot, or your mom, and just showing up. And then the unique opportunity, I would say, that they have is, because we're hurt experientially in relationships and have to be healed experientially in relationship, never underestimate the power and the ability that you have to be used by God to be a healing parental figure or a healing sibling figure, and to be like Jesus to that person. And remembering that it's a journey. Like, people spend years experiencing unmet longings and patterns and hurt, and it's not a destination. It's a journey. It's about every day helping somebody get one step closer to Jesus and understanding who he says they are, and helping others experience that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming in. For the audience that's watching, where can we go plug into the Resolution Movement?
Yeah, one of the simplest ways is resolutionmovement.org, and on there we've got a podcast for leaders and parents. We've got links to our social media. We do a lot of Instagram and TikTok to reach people, young people, where they're at. We're on Facebook too. And all of our handles on social media are at Resolution Movement. And we also do in-person speaking. We'll see how that starts to pick up a little bit, Lord willing, but given what's going on in our world today. But resolutionmovement.org is the easiest place to start.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome.